You can't change culture by talking about it. You have to give people a talk. Fred and Sally, they work for you for a year or 20 years. You've got to give Fred and Sally an innovation toolkit that they choose to use when you're not around. Why? Because it's easy, tangible, and fun.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode, as well as free training on creativity, over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have on the show Duncan Wardle. Duncan Wardle is an innovation keynote speaker, workshop leader, consultant, and the former vice president of innovation and creativity at the Walt Disney Company. During his 25-year career at Disney, he helped them develop some of their most innovative ideas and strategies. Ideas that would forever change the way the company and its franchises like Lucasfilms, Pixar, Marvel, and ESPN expands their impact, trains their employees, and solves problems creatively. It's my great pleasure to have Duncan with us today. So welcome, Duncan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So share with us all what's happening in your world at the moment.
Jigsaws at the moment. It's so funny because I went to Target, which is like the biggest department store or one of the big departments in the US. And you know the toilet roll aisle is going to be empty, so you don't bother going there. You know the kitchen towel aisle. You know the hand sanitizers. The jigsaw aisle is empty.
The jigsaw aisle is empty. Well, that's a good sign.
The jigsaw aisle is empty. Yes, I suppose it is a good sign. So I just got back from my last speaking gig in Copenhagen, just before, obviously, all the airspace got closed down. And now did my first virtual workshop this morning, which we can talk about a little bit later on. So that was very interesting. It was 4 continents, 12 countries, God knows how many time zones. But here's the thing, I've got time, right? The number one barrier to innovation is time to think. And guess what we've all got now? Plenty of it. And so I've been, every time I get off stage, somebody says, have you got a book? You're like, no. Have you got a book? No. Have you got a book? No. You're like, have you got a book? Piss off. And so now I've actually got time to write the book, finally. And, 25 years with the mouse. There's a couple of books. One is going to be around an innovation toolkit. And the other one, which I think will be a lot more fun, but perhaps less practical, is I'm going to call it Rolling Back the Ears, and 25 years of all the silly stuff that happens behind the scenes when you're sending your son's Buzz Lightyear to space on a real space shuttle to become the longest serving astronaut in space for the opening of Toy Story, to building a giant Olympic-sized swimming pool down Main Street, USA for Michael Phelps to swim down, or stealing a turkey from the White House from the President of the United States of America for Thanksgiving. So all the kind of the silly stuff that happens behind the scenes when you're pulling off some of the big audacious stunts. And then the other book is, people say, well, why did you leave Disney? You were there 30 years, you were head of innovation creativity. Are you stupid? You're like, no, I was there 30 years. That's a long time. Wow. From 87 to 2017. And I'm looking up at my bronze Jiminy Cricket, thank you for 30 magical years of service statue. But when they gave it to me, I should have been grateful, but all I could think of was mortality. You're like, oh shit, I'm well over halfway. So I thought, you know what, I got to go do something different. And here's what I found. Is we tried 4 models of innovation at Disney. Number one, I hired IDEO and said, hey, you know what you're doing. I don't, make me look good. And that worked to a certain extent. But again, when they left, you had to ask yourself, how much have we changed our culture? How much do we know how to do what they do? And of course, they weren't going to show us how they do what they do, or you wouldn't hire them again. So then I thought, okay, we'll create an innovation team. I'll be in charge of it. What could possibly go wrong? You can act as a catalyst for change. But you also subliminally send the message to the rest of the organization, hey, we've got an innovation team. You're off the hook. You just keep doing business the way you've always done it. Well, that's a terrible message to send to the rest of the organization. Then we tried some accelerator models where we would bring in some young tech startups who had an amazing piece of new technology, and we helped them scale it because Disney's very good at scaling. The fourth one was hackathons, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. But what I noticed with each of these was the one thing we hadn't done was changed our culture. So the challenge I set to the organization was, how might we embed innovation into everyone's DNA? And I thought, okay, And then I thought, I'm just listening. You go to all these conferences and you hear all these C-suite execs stand up and go, we must innovate, you must think differently, we must be brave, we must take risks. And you're like, great, going to show me how? I thought, God, nobody's showing people how to do it. All I have to do is create a toolkit that makes innovation easy, creativity tangible, and the process fun. Now, companies are a little bit shy of the word fun because they think, oh, it's not going to drive quarterly results. No, look, you can't change culture by talking about it. You have to give people a tool. Fred and Sally, they work for you for a year or 20 years. You've got to give Fred and Sally an innovation toolkit that they choose to use when you're not around. Why? Because it's easy, tangible, and fun. And that's what I do. That's what I've done for the last 3 years. I now do a couple of courses at Harvard with their executive MBA course in Yale. Who knew? The Edinburgh Napier University, some decided to give me an honorary doctorate last year, for which I am remarkably humble because I think I was the worst student ever to grace their presence. I think the only A I ever got as a student was absent because I didn't show up for the exam. And now it's amazing. It's the amount of companies that are, look at this transition we're about to go through, right? The next 6 months, we've got a couple of things in our favor. A, time to think. We've never had it before. Well, you got it now. B, we've got to pivot and pivot fast because all of these industries that have been slow decline, physical retail, physical restaurants, the sports industry, the conference industry, right? They've been in slow decline for 10, 20 years because they've never changed. Now, suddenly in the next 6 months, anybody who hasn't discovered Amazon is going to discover it really quickly. Anybody who doesn't discover Uber Eats or, another similar service that brings food to your door from a local restaurant is going to discover that very, very quickly. People who haven't discovered virtual gaming and sports may discover that in the next 6 months, as opposed to me doing a jigsaw. So will we all go back to restaurants as we did before? Will we all go back to shopping as we did before? We will all go back to the sports arena? No, we won't. Will we go back? Yes, of course we will. In the numbers that we used to? No, I don't believe so. So these industries, unless they pivot really, really, really fast, are in real trouble. But they've got time to think. So now it's about giving them a toolkit. So here we are. We've got time to think. We've got all of these industries that are being challenged, whether it's physical retail, sports, conference industry, movie theaters. Walt created this. It's an amazing time we've got time to think. We've also got time to challenge the rules of our industry and really not iterate, but innovate. And Walt created this tool back in 1940 that enabled him to do that. It's a tool that came up with Disneyland, Netflix, Uber. It's a tool about listing the rules, and Walt had a film called Fantasia where he wanted it to mist inside the theatre and heat pumps in, and the theatre owner said no, it's too expensive. So Walt listed the rules of going to a movie theatre. You must go at a set time, it's dirty, it's dark, you have to sit down, you have to watch the previews. By the way, between 1940 and 2020, what's changed in the movie theatre industry? They've iterated, they haven't innovated. They've gone to multi-screen, they've gone to big screen, and the cigarette girl's gone. But guess what? Nothing else has changed. So there's an industry that is just needs to either completely innovate or go away, because nothing's changed. But Walt listed the rules of showing his movie in a movie theatre, one of which was Walt, can't control the environment. He said, well, what if I could control the environment? Well, that's not provocative enough. The more provocative and absurd your what if statement, your question, the further out of your river of thinking, your expertise and experience you'll get. So he said, well, what if I take my movies out of the theatre? Well, that's pretty provocative in 1940. He said, well, okay. Well, if I take my movies out of the theatre, they can't be two-dimensional because I don't have any movie screens and people wouldn't be able to see them and it would be outdoors. Or what if I made them three-dimensional? Well, if I make them three-dimensional, I'd have to have people play the characters. Well, if I had people play the characters, Cinderella couldn't live next to Jack Sparrow and Davy Crockett because people wouldn't be immersed in her story. Well, I'll put her in a different land. Oh, wait a minute, I'll call it Disneyland, the biggest creative idea of the 20th century. Fast forward to 2005, Reed Hastings, one of the co-founders of Netflix, had used the same tool. He was fed up of paying late fees like all of us. And he listed the rules of going to Blockbuster Video. You had to be kind of rewind, you had to drive to a physical store, you had to go during opening hours, you had to have a membership card, you had to pay late fee. And he said, what if there was no physical store? That was an absurd suggestion in 2005. If you know how to do it, that's iteration, not innovation. He didn't know how to do it. So he said, well, what if, or imagine a world where I could Well, wait a minute, YouTube's been around for a few years now, and they're only streaming amateur content. Well, what if I only stream professional content? What if I do a deal with all the movie studios to stream their content online? Well, wait a minute, nobody would have to drive to a physical store. I'd be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Nobody would have to rewind anything. I'll cut the rental off after 24 hours. Nobody will pay a late fee. I'll call it Netflix. I'll take my idea to Blockbuster 5 times. They'll turn me down 5 times. I'll take them out of business in less than 5 years. And I won't go through the whole story, but it sounds like a joke. 2 guys walk into a bar. It's true. I believe it was Chicago. Could have been Philadelphia. It was about 8 years ago. They'd had too much to drink. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. It was raining. They couldn't get a cab. And one of them said to the other one, what if every car was a cab? Well, guess who went on to create Uber? It's a remarkably powerful tool to use.
So you as you've been talking about that, you've been talking about creativity and innovation and almost kind of using them interchangeably. If we see like annual reports of companies, or they'll often say they'll be using the word innovation more than they use the word creativity. So what's your sense of those two words and how they're used?
That's because they think they're appealing to their shareholders and Wall Street. For me, this is it. I believe everybody is creative. Why? Because when you were a small boy, you got a huge gift for your birthday or for Christmas, and it came in a massive box, and you took the toy out of the box. And what did you spend the rest of the next 5 days playing with?
Playing with the box.
The box. Right. Why? Because it could be anything you wanted it to be. We were all born creative, and then went to school and we were told it's just a box. So creativity starts to get squeezed out of us. Now, if you define creativity as the ability to paint, to create graphic design, to create music, then that's one definition of creativity. I have a broader definition. I believe creativity is the ability to have an idea, and we all know we can have one. I believe I define innovation as the ability to get that idea done. So Walt not only got, he had the idea for Disneyland, but he got it done. Steve Jobs had the idea for touchscreen technology, but he got it done. And that, to me, is the difference between innovation and creativity. One is the ability to have the idea. 2 is the audaciousness to get it done.
And then you were talking there about having this time to think and about breaking rules just now. I've been seeing in different medias this idea that we are going through this with what's kind of going on around the world at the moment, where potentially this is going to create another creative renaissance, and then people will point to things like the plague, which may cause the Renaissance, or things like Vienna when they had their big creative age in 1800s caused by the cholera epidemic. Do you feel that, because you're living through this just now, do you feel that this could be
So I'll give you 3 examples right now. I mean, the great phrase is necessity is the mother of invention, right? I mean, that's been around for a long time. So 3 examples. There was a very small distillery in Western Canada who, before all the big guys got in on it, would turn their distillation process into making hand sanitizer in less than a week. And then there was 2 Italian guys up in Lombardy realized their hospital could not produce the amount of pumps they needed for the amount of ventilators they needed, couldn't get them in the door quickly enough. They brought in their 3D printer and they knocked out over 100 in 8 hours for $1 a piece. And then there was a high school in Japan. I'm not sure if you saw this on social. They realized they weren't going to get their high school graduation this year. So they partnered with one of the kids who was genius in Minecraft, got hold of the high school handbook, got all the photographs of all the kids, all the teachers, photographs of the gym, and recreated their graduation ceremony live in Minecraft. So, if mother is the necessity of invention, I think we're going to see a lot more inventions in there. So, for example, look, as I talked about, do I think movie theaters will start streaming direct to the public in the next 2 years? I think it was coming anyway. I think the virus will accelerate it. What was the other? Oh, yes, the work. You're not in your office right now. I'm not in my office right now. And nobody listening to this podcast right now is in their office right now. So what will your employers realize in the next 3 months? They're going to realize that at least 1/3 of their employees don't actually have to be in their office. So think of the money they're going to save on rent in the future when they actually realize we can actually, unless you're performing an operational role, can you in fact learn from home? So I think there's going to be lots of different inventions popping up in the next 6 months.
So one of these things you were just mentioning it right at the start was going on and doing essentially a workshop, a virtual creativity workshop as well. Obviously, that technology has been around for quite a while, and suddenly overnight people have almost been forced to go and actually use it and to learn how to use it and learn these tools. So I'd love to know, what was your experience of delivering something you're very well known as not being necessarily just that person at the 50,000 foot level, but someone that's actually teaching those tools to help people develop the creative culture. How does that change in the online, teaching that kind of thing and sharing that in the online world and working with people collaboratively that way, as opposed to in the physical world?
Yeah, I think I did the first one yesterday morning and this morning for SAP around the globe. There were, I think, 4 different continents, 12 different countries, God knows how many different time zones. And we actually took them through a 4-hour workshop, 2 hours yesterday, 2 hours today, where I did essentially online what I would normally do in the real world. And through Zoom now, you can actually do virtual breakout groups. So we could send them off into their breakout groups. They could come back in again. It was moderated. We had digital virtual whiteboards where they could actually work on the whiteboards and share that through screen share with the rest of the audience. And I would say, I think it took twice as long as doing it in room for real. But I think partially that was me learning of what I could do and what I couldn't get away with in a virtual environment. But at the end of it, I just got a lovely message from the EVP of sales for the organization saying that was the best single virtual workshop he's ever been in. So you're like, okay. And that was my first one. But the funny thing was I posted a picture of my laptop with all of these people on it on Facebook saying, hey, I'm doing my first virtual workshop. And a mate of mine who obviously knows me quite well and obviously knows my house quite well, he goes, wait a minute. And you could only just see it. So you'd have to really know. He goes, wait a minute. Are you doing a virtual workshop on top of your football team? I was like,
And so I'd love to, whether going through that experience then, as a teacher in that sense, do you see the potential that there's things that we can do actually better in the virtual world rather than the physical world?
Look at all the people. So I was going to do a couple of projects this year, but because of the coronavirus, I won't be able to go in person. I was going to go to Australia for a month and run 20 workshops for a series of not-for-profits at no cost. I was going to do the same thing in India for a couple of weeks. Well, guess what? We're going to have to figure out how to do it virtually. But what virtual will do is it's going to open up, let's say, training and workshops to a whole group of people who couldn't afford to bring somebody to the other side of the planet to run a real workshop. But you know what? Virtually, yeah, they probably could afford it, right? Because you don't have to pay for flights. You don't have to. So, I mean, think about the conference industry. The first conference you ever went to and the last one. Let me describe them to you. 8:30 till 9 o'clock networking. The coffee's a bit bitter. The orange juice is sour. And the croissants are 2 days old. 9 till 9:15, the sponsors got the stage and they're going to bore the living crap out of everybody. 9:15, the keynote speaker is late onto the stage and promises time for Q&A, but we ran out of time. We go to break. We come back to the panel of doom. How do I know it's the panel of doom? Because a third of the audience are on their cell phones. That automatically tells me it's the panel of doom. We go to lunch. It's yesterday's steak, shrimp, and chicken left over from convention services. We come back to a breakout group. Always the most useful part of the day, but always too short. We finish with a rousing keynote speaker with beautiful teeth who bounces up and down a lot and is called a motivation speaker. Inspires and motivates. And a week later, we left that conference in spoke of we were going to change the world. And a week later, somebody says, "How was that conference in Newcastle?" And this totally blank look comes over your face. You vaguely remember being at it, can't remember any of the speeches, and then you think, okay, what have I learned to help me think differently and grow my business? You didn't. Why? Because speakers are selfish. That's why. The conference industry is selfish because they hire people from Amazon, Disney, and Nike. Why? Because you'll buy a ticket. Can they speak? I don't care as long as I've made my money. If somebody's giving you a day of their time, bloody well give them something of value. And I believe what people, yes, they want to be inspired and motivated, and that's great. But what they really want are tangible tools they can use tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to help them think differently and survive and thrive in this new economy.
So one of the things we often hear about creativity is being comfortable with trying things and failing. Some things are not going to work, whether you use the word failure or not. Can you tell us about a time in your life and your work, perhaps more recently, when you've made that move from the world of the corporate world at Walt Disney to the kind of what you do today, when you worked on something, you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason, it didn't quite work out like you'd hoped. And more importantly, what was the lesson that you took from that experience?
Daily. Look, if you're not screwing up, you're not trying anything different, right? I mean, you've got to screw up. And as long as nobody got hurt, nobody got injured, who cares, right? Unless you obviously wasted millions of money. That would be slightly different, raising the stakes. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because, what matters right now is people's health. That's what matters. And so if you screw up when you try, like we did the virtual workshop this morning. Actually, somebody from Coca-Cola called me yesterday and said, could I give them an energizer to do in a virtual meeting? And I said, okay. And I've got loads of energizers lined up. And she said, well, actually, we won't be able to see each other. I was like, oh my God, I can't think of a single one you could do. So that was a really good challenge. So now I've got to go away and think about it. But no, I failed. God knows, you fail every day. I mean, why not? I think the best example of failure is Richard Branson. If you think about all the brands that he has launched in the last 20 years, of which I'd say over 50% don't exist anymore of the products and services he created, do you consider Richard Branson to be an unsuccessful entrepreneur, or do you consider him to be the world's most successful entrepreneur? Another great example of failure, it's stuck to the side of my head at the moment because my earphones aren't working. It's called an iPhone. Do you have an iPhone?
I do indeed.
Which iPhone do you have?
I think this is a 6S.
Okay, and how many iPhones have you purchased since they came out?
I have probably had, this is probably my third, I would say.
Right, okay. And some of us may have had each one, right? But here's genius, right? Prototyping and not being afraid to fail. If they'd got it right, would you have bought a new one? No, of course not. So they didn't get it right. The first one, the volume button didn't work. The second one, the screen didn't scratch. The third one, the camera wasn't good enough. The fourth one was blah, blah, blah. The fifth one was... So what happened? They are live prototyping and failing every day and their consumer continues to buy it, because if they got it right and perfect, you ain't going to buy another one. So let's not get it. But, light bulbs, they created the everlasting light bulb over 30 years ago. You can't buy one because you wouldn't buy another one. So we're making products that fail actually helps create revenue.
So the work you do today, you're usually traveling around the world, being a keynote speaker, doing workshops, consulting with companies. Obviously now you're doing a lot more virtually at the same time. But in this journey, because you're getting a chance now to work with so many different companies. You're not just at Walt Disney Company, you're working with lots of different brands, lots of different industries, different countries, different challenges. Has there been a key insight or a light bulb moment in your own personal journey as a creative person?
Two, I suppose. One is every company's the same. They say they're not. Yeah, they are. When they talk about their challenges, we've got lots of rules. Well, guess what? So Disney doesn't have any rules. What? The largest single-site employer in the United States of America, operating a piece of land twice the size of Manhattan Island, hosting over 25 million visits a year. You don't think they have rules? Of course they have damn rules. So everybody, we're really different. So people say, we're B2B. Well, no, you're not. You're B2C. Well, no, it's different here. No, it's not, because the B2B, your business partner is in fact your consumer. So you're B2C. And then one person once said to me, the job of the country manager is to tell you it's different here. But I suppose the biggest learning I've had is I talked it, but I hadn't walked it. I would talk the fact, and I am a huge believer that you can get inspiration from innovation from looking outside of your industry, and I give you lots of examples of where you can. But it's genius now, because I might be working for a pharmaceutical company one day, an automotive company another day, a tech company another day, a hospitality company. And what you learn from each industry, you'll take away something that you could apply to a different industry simply by thinking differently to everybody else. So I get to play the naive expert, and I'm a huge believer in the naive expert. A naive expert is somebody who you bring into an ideation session because they don't work for you or don't work in your line of business. What does that give them permission to do? It gives them permission to ask the silly question that we're all too embarrassed to ask. It gives them permission to throw out the audacious idea, ungoverned by our politics, our turf, and our hierarchy and our approval process. So do you have a pen and a piece of paper handy?
I do indeed.
Excellent. I'll show you how this works. We were charged with coming up with the EU Retail Dining and Entertainment Complex for Hong Kong Disneyland. And by the way, if anybody else is listening, feel free to grab your pen and your piece of paper, because I'm about to give you a 7-second challenge. So we were designing a new retail dining and entertainment complex for Hong Kong Disneyland. And in the room, I had 12 white male American architects over 50. That's called groupthink. So I invited in as my naive expert a young Chinese female chef. Why? Because she wouldn't think like they did. And I gave them the following challenge, which I'm going to give you now. I'm going to give you 7 seconds to draw an object. I'll name it. I'll give you 7 seconds to draw it. I would like you, please, to draw a house. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, I'm going to describe the house, and you'll have to tell me how accurate I was. Is your door, you've only drawn one door, clearly, and you've put it on the ground floor in the middle?
There's no door.
No door. Okay. And 2 windows with bars over them.
There's no windows.
Oh, what shape's the roof? A
Pointed.
triangle. A triangle. Here's the thing: 90% of the people on the phone will have drawn the house the same way everybody else draws it. They'll put a door in the front of the middle. They'll draw 2 windows. They'll put bars over them, and then they'll put a triangle for a roof. Why? Because our river of experience, our river of thinking, our river of expertise tells us that's what a house looks like. And of course, the 12 white male American architects drew the house exactly as I thought they would, but not the young Chinese chef. She drew dim sum architecture, which we hadn't seen it before. We all laughed because we realized we stayed in our river of thinking of what a house should look like, because all our houses look the same. Hers was a round bamboo dish with a shrimp ball and a pork ball and a little chimney with a Chinese lady waving out the window. And we all laughed because we realized we stayed in our river of thinking. She gave us permission to get out of our river of thinking and consider audacious architecture. Well, on the way out the door, somebody slapped a post-it note over her drawing, and it said, dim sum architecture, distinctly Disney, authentically Chinese. 7 years later, the strategic brand position for the Shanghai Disney Resort that guided the entire design of the resort was distinctly Disney, authentically Chinese. I suppose so I position myself as a naive expert, and by going in and actually not knowing your industry, it gives me permission to ask the questions that you're too embarrassed to ask and challenge some of the rules that you would never have thought to challenge. So I would encourage you to bring a naive expert into every different ideation session you run.
But actually, there's actually a lot of science behind that. I know that there was a study done a number of years ago by Dr. K.H. Kim from South Korea, who did a study, and she looked at, she was a person that, if we give this word, the creativity crisis that Time magazine put up a few years ago, she was the person that did the research related to that. And she said one of her studies was looking at Nobel Prize winners. And she said some of the most successful Nobel Prize winners are what she classed as boundary crossers. So they make a discovery in one area, but their training, their background is in a completely different area. I mean, a good example of that would be like a Richard Feynman in terms of physics, for example, who was a physicist, was a bongo player, picked up lots of different things, and he took that naivety, that beginner's mind, as you might say in Zen, into what he did and tried to look at with that childlike curiosity.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, it's about curiosity and making connections. I mean, Steve Jobs, when he came back to Apple, he'd seen an MP3 player and he thought, wait a minute, what if I connected with this, and came up with the iPod? I mean, it was genius. I think it's the ability to make connections between different industries. And I think, innovation definitely comes more often than not from actually looking outside of your industry and borrowing back the underlying principle.
Now, you were talking about different tools a second ago, iPhones, for example. Do you have an online resource or a tool or an app, like an Evernote, for example, you find very useful in your own creative process?
Interestingly enough, when I go out and I run my workshops and I give my talks, 99% of them are hand-drawn. It's hand-drawn animation, A, because it's part of my legacy. I was with Disney for 25 years. And B, because PowerPoint presentations are given by people who don't actually know what they're talking about. Therefore, they have 6 bullet points on the page to remind them what it is they're supposed to say. But that means they don't know their stuff. Well, that's not good. But here's the other and far more important point. Let me ask you a question. How many days are there in September?
I've actually 31, is it?
30.
Is it? Okay.
But so how did you know?
I don't know. There was a rhyme that used to, 30 days
Bingo.
are September, but I couldn't actually remember it when you asked me that question.
30 days have September, blah, 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 and November. Anybody who answers like that just tells you they're an auditory learner. They learn by listening because they learned it at kindergarten. Some people will put their knuckles together and start counting them and go January, February, March, April, May, and each knuckle is 31 and each dip is 30. Now, you wouldn't know that because you're an auditory learner because you remember the rhyme. And some people would just say, I closed my eyes and saw a picture of a calendar. They're your visual learners. Here's the most important thing when you're making presentations, when you're making pitches, when you're running meetings, when you're running workshops. 2/3 of your audience do not share your preferred learning style. So if you put a PowerPoint presentation up with the word data on the front cover, I'll be asleep before you got to slide 2. Why? Because I'm a visual learner. I need images to keep me awake, and by hand drawing everything, I make it visceral for people. I make it real, and I'll see the learners in the room, and I'll know who they are. Because as I finished my workshop or presentations, they'll come up and start taking pictures of the individual images. Why? Because they'll never read the workbook I give them because they're a visual learner. They will remember the tools from the image I drew. But if it was a PowerPoint slide, they wouldn't bother.
And Duncan, if you could recommend just one book to our audience? And your book isn't out yet, so it can be one of your books, but one book to our audience, and also one album.
The one coming out next year.
Yeah, the one coming out next year. One. I think it's going to be lots of books coming out next year. One book and one album, one record to our audience. What would those be?
That's on the spot. Well, the book's easy. Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, very good friend of mine at Pixar, talks about the creative process at Pixar, talks about the power of storytelling. And I think what Pixar got right is a couple of things. A, it's the ability to tell a story. B, it's the ability to reach inside and find the core consumer truth. And what I mean by this, and I had a black and white smack in the face of the power of storytelling about 10 years ago. We were designing a new retail dining and entertainment complex for Florida for Walt Disney World. And the first three architectural firms in the room, they'd all spent over $100,000 on their presentations easily, because it was a huge piece of business. And all of them had created architectural models and renditions of what this future cityscape might look like, into the most intricate details. And the fourth room we walked into, there were just 12 rocking chairs, a little old boy sitting in one, and the lights were turned down. They were around a fake campfire. I said, come on in, close your eyes, sit down, or sit down first, and then close your eyes. He says, I want to tell you a story. So close your eyes for me for a moment. I want to tell you a story about a place called Disney Springs, where a young man called Walt Disney met a young girl called Lillian in 1914. It was based in Central Florida, and it was founded on a central spring that came up through the middle of the town and then spread out in 5 different arteries, past the blacksmiths, past the greengrocers. Can you see it?
Absolutely.
Of course you can, because you got your eyes closed. It was absolutely genius. He knew his audience. He knew we were storytellers, so he decided to tell a story, not create an architectural model. And he got us to close our eyes, so we all got to a place wherever we wanted to. One is about finding a core consumer truth. So now, you're not as old as I am, but for those of us who grew up in the land of cowboys, we were cowboys. We were sheriffs. We had the badge. We had the coonskin hat. We had the tassels. And we used to walk around with an awkward gait. And then some dude called Neil Armstrong came bouncing down the stairs and said, one giant leap for man, one giant leap for mankind, and ruined it for all of the cowboys. And suddenly, what do we want? We wanted to be an astronaut overnight. Screw the cowboys. And so Toy Story was written for me. Now, when you were a little boy, did you have monsters in your closet or under the bed?
Yes, probably. Yes.
Therefore, Monsters Incorporated was written for you. And if you've seen the film Inside Out, it's an amazing piece of work about this little teenage girl who is controlled by 4 emotions during the day who operate inside her brain: joy, disgust, fear, anger. Well, we all know that at some point in the day we're feeling really good, we're full of joy, and some arsehole cuts us up in their car, and suddenly, boom, we're controlled by anger. And so that was written for all of us. So Pixar's film is not just their ability to write a great story, it's ability to find a core consumer truth hidden within that story. So I would say Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Inc. Best album. I'm a 70s kid. I'm ELO, I'm Wings, I'm ABBA. I heard they were getting back together and can't believe it. The crush of my life. My nephews and nieces know that as I'm a Brit, I'm not particularly renowned, a Brit over 50. Dancing is probably not in my list of top 3,552 skills, but they know that if they wait till Uncle Duncan's had a bit to drink at 2:30 in the morning and they put on Dancing Queen, Uncle Duncan will own the dance floor.
I think maybe you and I, next time we're both in Stockholm together, we need to go to the ABBA Museum, because actually a chance to dress up on the stage and do the whole that. So watch this space. And finally, Duncan, imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and you have to start from scratch. So you have all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you and you know no one. What would you do? How would you restart things?
Well, that happened 3 years ago. I left the Walt Disney Company. I had networked inside one of the world's largest companies for 30 years, and I knew everybody inside the Walt Disney Company. I didn't know a soul on the outside of the world, and they didn't know me. And you know what? I gave it a go. When I say I gave it a go, and the advice I will offer to anybody is, do what you love, and you'll be really good at it. Right? You don't see me doing maths and finance. Why? Because I was a disaster at it. That's why. I was really good at helping people think different and coming up with moonshot ideas. I thought, you know what? I'm going to do that because I love doing it. And so I'm really good at it. So it doesn't matter what you love. Go do that. Whatever it is, as we found in the last 3 weeks, Life's too short to put up with all the crap of working and doing jobs you don't like. Do the one you love. You will be successful at. I started with nothing 3 years ago in my 50s. Really not a good chance to be an entrepreneur. But you know what? Now, in the last 3 years, now it's just taken off.
And Duncan, what is the best place for people to go to learn more about you, your keynotes, your workshops? I'm sure your online things now as well. Future the book. Where should they be going to find out about
the book? Well, TED.com, and just type in my name, Duncan, Duncan Wardle, Wardle. You'll find a couple of TED Talks there. One on the theory of creativity, which is a series of tools you can use to help you think differently. Another is on the death of marketing and the birth of the experience economy, which I firmly believe in. The Generation Z will not be buying houses and cars. And now after this, not even Generation Z will all be seeking experiences and not necessarily purchasing things. And then obviously DuncanWardle.com.
Well, Duncan, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having
sharing
me.
with us about your creative life. And I wish you all the best. And hopefully we'll be sharing a stage together digitally, virtually, physically at some point in the future.
All right. Well, thanks again.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.